afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Today we're putting the Gerald Stanley trial and verdict in focus. There's been a lot to say about this topic, and if you want to join in on our conversation, our phone lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag Stanley Trial. Before I introduce you to our guest this week, let's set the scene. Last Friday, Gerald Stanley was found not guilty in the death of 22-year-old Colton Bushy. And it has caused an uproar around Canada with rallies being held across the country. Todd Lamoran got the reaction from Ottawa, where the family has traveled to meet with MPs and the Prime Minister.
I don't really have anything to say, but I am very, very honored to be here, and I'm happy that we got to meet the Prime Minister, and we continue praying that something is done and that we could go home and tell the people that we tried hard. And we're still going to keep trying, and we're going to keep going, and this ain't going to stop.
Senator Lillian Dick called the Gerald Stanley not guilty verdict classic racism.
This whole thing was imbued with racism from day one. The moment they started talking to Debbie Baptiste, the moment that happened, the way the police handled the evidence, and, there was just failure after failure after failure to take Colton's death seriously.
Dick chairs the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Affairs. She has simple advice to the government.
I would suggest they do something that's concrete and easy, because it's not just Indigenous people who are upset. It's all Canadians. We've lost faith in our justice system. And if we lose faith in our justice system, then, chaos ensues.
Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould says she will look at eliminating the process that many Canadians say kept Indigenous people off Gerald Stanley's jury.
We can make changes to the criminal code to eliminate peremptory challenges, but we have to work with the provinces and territories to ensure that there are Indigenous peoples that are in the jury pool, how they notify those individuals.
The Bushy family says the RCMP treated them like they were the perpetrators from day one of their investigation. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodall said filing a complaint is the way to go.
The family started the process, as well they should, and they've gone through the first part of it. There are other stages yet to go.
For Senator Dick, the verdict has made it difficult to talk about reconciliation.
I hear a lot of people, my friends, and I've seen on social media, where people are saying, don't even use that word anymore. Don't even say reconciliation, because we are so fed up with the racism. On the other hand, this gives us the opportunity to say, yes, racism exists, and yes, to meet reconciliation and to get a nation-to-nation relationship, we cannot forget about the racism by individuals and by systemic racism.
Joining us now in studio, Jacqueline Romano, the Chair of Indigenous Studies at the University of Winnipeg. From Toronto, Erica Violet-Lee, grad student in social justice and a Cree activist from Saskatoon. Joining us from Saskatoon is Doug Cuthand, a well-known First Nations columnist. And on the line with us is Ryan, one of the founders of a Facebook page called Farmers with Firearms. The group started not long after the August 9th, 2016 shooting of 22-year-old Bushy. APTN has agreed not to disclose Ryan's last name, as members of the group have received death threats. He's joining us on the phone from near Saskatoon. I'd like to, Erica, start with you and what your thoughts are on the acquittal of Gerald Stanley and whether the decision came as a surprise to you.
Every time something like this happens, I think it won't be a surprise. And every time it is a surprise, because it's one of our family members, one of our community members being killed, and it's Canada saying it doesn't count as murder. So of course, we're shocked and we're angry, and most of all, we're frustrated at the fact that we have to go back into our daily lives and know that there are people that want to hurt us just because we're Indigenous, walking down the street, whether we're in Saskatoon or Toronto. And it's exhausting to live that way, and I want something different for our future, for us.
Jacqueline, was this a decision you were anticipating from the jury?
Well, actually, no. I expected something different. But that said, I wasn't completely surprised with the way it turned out either. I was disappointed.
What were you expecting?
Well, I mean, I don't want to give my judgment to the case, but I would have thought that there would have been a bit more reflection based on the sort of facts that I'd read throughout the case. It was still surprising that the totally not guilty verdict came up. I was a bit shocked, yeah.
Doug, as someone from the area who was attending the trial, was this outcome something you were expecting?
Mm-hmm. No, we weren't expecting this at all, and hit us as a ton of bricks. What happened was I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback and can't.
Okay, Doug, no problem. We'll try and come back to you in a moment here. Ryan, we'll go to you on the phone and how you felt the decision. Was this the right decision, and why?
Yeah, hi there. Good to be on the show. Just one thing I wanted to maybe correct you off at the start there. The website that we did set up was originally set up probably 4 or 5 months before the Gerald Stanley accident happened. Anyway, going forward with that, the outcome of the case, I will say, and this is probably my opinion, and I think a lot of people, out in Saskatchewan, living in the rural areas and farmers, we were expecting, at the very least, probably a manslaughter charge, but at the same time, we follow it as close as we can without being in the room or the courtroom itself. So we don't have all the the stuff in front of us that obviously the juror or the people on the jury would have.
Doug, should we come back to you, or are you having any better sound there?
Sure, I think I'll try again. We were expecting a not guilty verdict in this trial. The people in the media room were all kind of thinking we'd get a manslaughter charge, and that's what we were expecting, not the not guilty verdict that came through. And we were really shocked and amazed, and we couldn't get over it. I think there were mistakes made on the part of the Crown, and there were mistakes made on the part of the witnesses, and it wasn't what we were expecting at all.
Ryan, we did agree to withhold your last name, although everyone else on the show has had no such request, and I think we've all probably, many people have received terrible messages from people online, although I have seen some of the reposts of the messages people of your group have been receiving. But yep. There's a lot of racist comments on the site and people advocating violence. Is that something you condone? No,
not at all. We've been overwhelmed with the amount of support that we've been having here and showing up over the last couple of years with the site. It's definitely something that we try and stop as much as we can. We're in the midst of adding a few more administration people on there to make sure that none of that stuff gets floated around. And like I say, if there is stuff on there, we do have our own lives right now. I'm at work as we speak, so it's we can't be running the site full time. So obviously we need to add some more people, and it comes from both sides. And I only put obviously the one on our site for people to look at, but I've had to ban probably 200 or 300 people on this in the last 3 days. So there is definitely racism from both sides, and nobody can deny that.
There does seem to be a tendency on the site to place blame on First Nations, but arguably one of the largest known convicted thieves in the area was a non-Indigenous farmer who stole over $1.2 million worth of equipment over a 5-year period, and there doesn't seem to be much of a response on the site to that.
Yeah, that's actually when that I think went down. I was out of the country on a holiday at the time, so I didn't really follow that one as much. And over the last 3 years, we've, if I had to say, and by keeping track of these things, Our site, there's 50-50 on articles. If we have to put a color on this, if that's what we have to start doing to talk about it, which I didn't think we had to, but now that door is opened. Where I live and where the site originally started from, we're quite oil field heavy area. With the economic downturn there, 2-3 years ago, there's lots of, shop thefts, snowmobiles, ATVs, all that, and they are white people that are doing it as well. So this is crime has no color here, and that's really what I wish people would focus on. As far as the Indigenous side happens, I mean, if nobody wants to admit that we have a problem with our theft, and some reserves are good, some are not as good. And the red pheasant one, if you get anybody does any little bit of history on it and background checks, there's a lot of people that are, been assault cases. There's a couple ongoing cases. I think 5 of the main chiefs and stuff in there have all had court issues and stuff like that. So if we're going to be fixing this stuff, maybe we should be fixing some other things in our system. And we got to get. This is Canada. We're all supposed to be the same people, but we need to be helping them and ensuring that our youth and stuff have a good foot forward in the future.
Doug, you've written recently that rural crime in Saskatchewan is, quote, a dog whistle term that means Aboriginal people. You mind elaborating on that for us?
Yeah, it definitely is one of those dog whistle terms. You hear a lot of it. There was a lot of farmers wearing camo and whatnot attending this trial, and so we placed a spy in their midst, and we found out they're with that farmers group, and they were very racist in their comments, and our spy went out drinking with them, and he was absolutely amazed at what they told him. So yeah, there's a great deal of racism in Saskatchewan, and it's coming out more and more, and this kind of organization scares the hell out of me.
Doug, do you mind elaborating more on what this spy had to say, what they heard? Oh, they were just repeating all the information that came out of the trial, and they were talking about rural crime, talking about getting even with the Indians, all this kind of usual stuff. I really can't elaborate too much on it right now. Jacqueline, we've been hashtagging this as rural racism and asking people if they thought there was a problem in rural Canada with racism. Of course, we received a lot of messages saying that this isn't just a rural problem, and this is something you've done some research on, the type of racism that students and others encounter. Can you talk to us a little bit about that research?
Yeah, no, it is. It isn't just a rural problem. I think that racism against Indigenous people in this country is one of the sort of least talked about, least acknowledged, but certainly endemic problems. I've done research with students at the University of Winnipeg, Indigenous students, asking them for to account for their experiences of racism on a daily basis, and the results are truly saddening and astounding. From the moment they leave their house to get on the bus, students are facing comments, snickering, scowling, and outright insults just coming to the university. It's so disheartening, and it bears on one's self-esteem, how one sees oneself at the university, with feelings of belonging, feelings of acceptance, and feelings of safety. And it's a problem every step sort of along the way.
Erica, you're a student in Toronto. Is this something that you deal with quite often?
Absolutely, and I grew up in Saskatchewan my whole life, and I know what it's like to be in that space. I have family from the Battlefords. My ancestors are from the Battlefords, so I know what it's like to be super visible, and I'm visibly Indigenous, which changes my experience a lot too. In Toronto, it's different. It's sort of an invisibility, but in a lot of ways too, it's a break. And it's a break from in Saskatchewan, like going home over the winter break. I remember just like walking down the street and feeling those eyes on me again, like people that find me scary or disgusting just because of the way that I look, because I'm brown skinned, because I'm Indigenous. And it's just like, of course, we all have things we want to be doing other than fighting racism our entire lives. Like I wish I didn't have to talk about colonialism every day. But the reality is we can't just be students. We can't just be teachers. We can't just be partners and mothers and parents. we have to be activists every minute of our lives. So yeah, I know what it's like to have to miss work, to talk about racism, to challenge that, because I do it constantly. We do it constantly.
And Erica, when talking about that activism, you know, within hours, if not an hour of the verdict coming down, people like yourself, others across the country were organizing, planning these rallies. What was it like for you to see the thousands of people come out from coast to coast to take to the streets calling for justice and change?
It's beautiful. And I remember, too, during Idle No More, when the same thing happened, we're never afraid to get out in the streets, and that's what we have to do. That's our history. Our history is that we've never sat down and given up in Saskatchewan or across the country. As hard as things are, and as many policies and genocides that are done to us, we still keep coming out, and we come out not to try to convince people of our worth anymore, not to try to convince you that I'm someone who's worth loving, someone who's worth life. But we come together so we can be with people who understand, so we can just like be with each other and be in silence and know that we have a right to life, that we don't deserve to be shot in the back of the head, that we deserve to be free on our own homelands that were taken from us. So that's how I feel about organizing. That's how I feel about gathering. It's necessary for us.
We're going to, I'll get our guests to hold on for a second here as we're going to take a caller. I understand we have Robert joining us on the line from Wasaga Beach. Robert, go ahead.
Yes, I'm 75 years old. I'm born and raised up in northern Ontario on the reserve. I've seen it happening for all my life, that if there was anything ever wrong on there, take a look, and if there was an Indian there, he's the one that caused it. He's a troublemaker. And it's been like that right straight down. I moved down south to Midland to go to high school, and it never changed. They had the reserve out on Christian Island, and those boys would turn around and come in to town, and if there was a fight, the Indians end up in jail. And it's been going on like that for too long, people, much too long. It took that young, innocent child, that young boy, to get shot in the back of the head by a man that walked away innocent. Unbelievable. But it took his life to get people from coast to coast to protest. This is wrong. This is dead wrong.
Robert, just
things have to change.
A quick question for you. Was it heartening for you to see all the people that took to the streets following this to call for justice and come together?
If I wasn't so handicapped myself, I'd be there with them. It's brought me to tears, and a lot of it tears of joy, to see finally people coming together and saying it has to change now.
Robert,
no more.
Thank
no
you.
more. We don't need any more people shot in the head.
Robert, we thank you very much for taking the time to call in and share your thoughts with us. We've got to step away for a quick break, but when we return, we'll look at some of your comments we received on Facebook and Twitter and have our own discussion on the role social media has played in the aftermath of the not guilty verdict. So stick around. Welcome back to In Focus, where today we're putting the Gerald Stanley verdict and justice for Colton Bushy in focus. Let's go to social media now to hear what some of you have been saying about today's topic. And we asked, is there a problem with racism in rural Canada, and there was, of course, a lot to say about it. Sandy said, "I have not seen the ugliness until the murder of Colton Bushy. I knew racism existed, of course, but did not know this magnitude." Go to Margaret here now on Facebook, said, "Yes, there is. Racial injustice is still alive and well in Canada." Daryl is our next commenter from Facebook as well, saying the problem of racism and discrimination against Indigenous Canadians is everywhere in Canada. Some regions are worse than others. To Patricia's comment from Facebook, yes, there is. And the facts that there was not even one Indigenous person on the jury states there is, and we'll of course be talking about that in a minute here. And now to Charlene, who also commented on our Facebook page, there's a problem with racism in all of Canada, and that was something we certainly heard on our social media accounts. Cynthia says, the acquittal reaffirms what has been true in the country for centuries. It is perfectly acceptable for an Indigenous person to die so that a white person can protect his property. And finally, hear from Rob as well on Facebook, disgusted with what's happening in this country. The woman who was killed by throwing a trailer hitch at her also stands out in my mind. We have a huge problem. If you would like to join and add your opinion to our topic of conversation, here's how. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. And there is much more to read on our APTN InFocus on our Facebook and our Twitter pages. We'd like to hear what our guests here have to say about the role social media has played, the good and the bad. And I understand somebody just actually wrote on our Facebook page, as this is live on there right now, that Gerald Stanley should have killed them all. Erica, you're someone who's quite active on Twitter. How would you describe what you've been seeing online over the past week?
No different than what we've been experiencing since Idle No More, since before Idle No More, probably since the dawn of the internet. There has been internet racists, but as well, at a certain point you have to realize that there's always people who will devalue your life. And I can't spend any more time. I can't spend any more time thinking about that. I can't spend any more time trying to win them over. So what I do focus on is the communities that we're building online, which to me is amazing. It's so exciting to be able to connect with people on all sorts of different territory, Indigenous territory across the world, and organize. And it makes it also accessible for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to make it out to rally spaces.
Ryan, hopefully you're still on the phone with us there. You help administer a Facebook page with nearly 10,000 people on it. What have you been seeing since the verdict's come down?
Yeah, that's a good question there. Like I said before, the site that we started was a couple months before the Colton Bushy and Stanley incident there. So, it all started about, we're in the middle of nowhere. We don't have the police presence and stuff like that. And that's how it started. Like I said, there was the very first occasion, and this is when we started, it was about a vehicle on a grid road stepped out with a bunch of handguns pointed at a local farmer's help and stuff like that. So that was the kickoff from there that we started. Since the verdict on Friday, I get, like I say, the power of social media is pretty big, and it's both positive and negative. There's definitely been a lot of negative stuff in the last 2 or 3 days. We had to change around some settings on the page and stuff like that to stop some threats and whatnot coming in. And people are mad, and there's two sides to everything. And we, like I said, we try to contain as much as we can. There's lots of information floating around on the web, and it is also, I got to mention too, it's nice for you guys actually to give us a shot, give us a opportunity to explain what it's like to live out where we do, and we do appreciate that.
Ryan, have you personally faced threats online attacks?
Yeah, I guess I have had a few. And then when I actually posted one of them on the site for everybody to see, that we're not obviously condoning these things and stuff like that, I haven't had any since then, and none of our members have on the page or anything. And, you know, I should say also, you know, for sure most people, for the main part, are Indigenous people that are mad here the last couple of days sending bad messages. But there's both sides as well, and we've actually had a lot of positive feedback. I've had quite a few Indigenous people from across the province messaging us personally and, you know, saying that they understand what we're coming from and they get it. And, you know, one guy was, I think he was in the Army, he was a sniper and stuff like that. So it's actually good to see, you know, positive things coming out of this from both sides.
Doug, I understand you yourself have had some negative comments, some threats sent your way over some of your articles.
Oh, almost everything I do. I got the pages on the comment pages on my columns are always full of different comments from people, very hateful comments, and the newspaper editor of the Star Phoenix told me she spent most of the weekend just scrubbing my column because there was so many comments coming in on the Facebook page. They stopped the comment section on the stories during the trial because it just got ridiculous. So yeah, and then now they found my email and I'm getting emails. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of, but this is a small group. Let's just try to keep this in perspective. This is a small group of people. These are trolls, you know, and they live in their anonymity, and they, you know, I really believe that there's more good out there than we see in a lot of times too, you know.
We've seen the Prime Minister and the Justice Minister comment on Twitter as well, online and beyond that. Doug, is this something that you can remember happening before with previous court case, seeing a federal Justice Minister and Prime Minister weighing in on this all?
No, I've never seen this before in all my years of reporting. I've never seen such a outpouring of support or outpouring of, you know, from our own people too. The rallies and I was going to say protests, but they're not protests. They're demonstrations. They're rallies. They're people coming behind the Baptiste family and coming back in the spirit of Colton Boushie to make sure that, you know, he didn't die in vain. So there's a lot of things happening out there that I really have never seen before. It's very heartening. I think what we're seeing here is a historical shift, and it's taking place right now.
And I want to get back to you on that comment in a little bit here, Doug. But Jacqueline, what are your thoughts on the role social media has played here in having a sitting Prime Minister, Justice Minister weighing in on all this as well?
Well, I think it's important to realize they didn't weigh in so much on the facts of the case. What they commented on really was, in addition to sort of sympathy for the Boushie family, which have undergone you know, a huge tragedy and a great loss, but it is commenting on a system that is, and I mean, has been recognized previous to this, right, since the time of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, that there is something wrong with the justice system, that there is systemic racism and discrimination against Indigenous people. And hopefully this is a watershed moment for the government to do something real and substantive to change that.
And of course the legal process has been called into question here, and I'd like to play an interview with that we conducted earlier with criminal justice lawyer Michael Spratt.
Well, I think it's quite justifiable that there's some public outrage about the perception of justice not being delivered in this trial. And when we deal with criminal justice issues, beyond sort of real justice being delivered, perception matters a lot. And there's lots of reasons to question the perception of justice not being delivered in this case. Well, one of the most obvious aspects of this case is a lack of Indigenous representation on the jury. And there's a number of ways that the government can go about trying to change that. The first step is ensuring that Indigenous people actually make it into the jury pool, that is, people who are called down to the court to be eligible for jury duty. For a long time, we've known that there has been problems with those names missing from the juror rolls, and that is sort of the first systemic barrier that Indigenous people deal with when they're looking to participate in justice by being on a jury. The second way is to actually maybe offer some real compensation to jurors. Too often, members of minority or marginalized communities or people who live at the poverty line are excluded from being able to be on a jury because they simply can't afford to be. Because we pay our jury almost nothing and sometimes nothing at all. And that is another barrier that can be dealt with. And then, of course, this case also highlights the issue of peremptory challenges and how those can be abused by either the Crown or the defense to exclude certain groups from service. Well, certainly steps should be taken to make sure that every single Indigenous and person who wants to serve on a jury is actually given that opportunity, because they will be added to the rolls and called. But we can also take other steps. Many provinces have rules that eliminate people with even minor criminal convictions from serving on a jury, and that can disproportionately affect racialized and marginalized groups. We know that, especially when we look at Indigenous members of communities, they're charged and incarcerated and convicted at a disproportionate rate to white members of society. And even a minor conviction may be a barrier to serve on a jury. So certainly there are some easy steps that way that we can take when we look at the jury system. But I think more broadly, we can take some pretty straightforward and simple steps to decouple issues of poverty, of addiction, of mental health, and race from the criminal code by taking a look at mandatory minimum sentences and other sentencing procedures that, again, disproportionately impact racialized and Indigenous members of our community. Well, I think that those tweets do, when read in context, cross the line. There needs to be a distinct separation between what happens in politics and what happens in the court. An independent justice system free from any appearance of political interference is one of the underpinnings of our democracy. But I don't think anyone can disagree with the sentiment of the Prime Minister and Justice Minister's tweets. However, from my perspective, they ring a little hollow. These are the two people who can introduce real legislation to bring about the changes to correct the injustice that they seem to be so worried about. But we haven't seen any action on that front. It was promised a year ago, it was promised in the spring, it was promised in the fall, and it's been promised again, but these promises are starting to ring hollow.
Jacqueline, I'd like to go to you and just your thoughts on some of the things that Michael Spratt had to say there about the justice system and how it impacts Indigenous peoples.
Well, I would agree that it is inherently biased, and it has been, and it's been recognized for a long time. And right from the time of the AJI, we have been calling on the government to make real change. And it seems like in between cases, like the case of the Stanley trial and Colton Bushy, it gets forgotten. Indigenous issues get forgotten, and more sort of politically, attractive or other issues take precedence. Things that are going to be perhaps get more support with voters during election time take precedence, and Indigenous issues continue to remain simmering. With the report of the TRC, again, more talk, more show, more photo opportunities. Government officials love photo opportunities when these things come out. But in terms of actual real change, Indigenous people have to fight, have to go out in the street and have to ask for, recognition, equal recognition of their rights as opposed to other Canadians.
Erica, one thing we didn't hear too much about during the trial, and that was, shortly after the shooting and the treatment of Colton Bushy's family by RCMP at that time. Your thoughts on how that all went?
Of course. I saw at the preliminary hearing in North Battleford, I got to see all the evidence, and I got to sit with behind Colton Bushy's family, the Baptiste and Bushy family, as they were forced to relive the shooting of their son, of their cousin, and the evidence that was shown to us, the graphic evidence that was shown to us, everyone in the courtroom, and then to see the way that folks were sort of casually at the breaks laughing about it. And then there was a photo of Queen Elizabeth II overlooking the entire courtroom. And that's when we realized the problem is deeper than jury selection. And it's the context of the entire system. It's the fact that we're thinking for some reason that we should take Justin Trudeau's sentiment, no matter where we're from, because we all believe in democracy. But the fact is we had governments, we had systems, we had nations before the Queen, before Justin Trudeau, and before the Canadian justice system. So I don't want to just have a discussion about jury selection, because I think in the context of white supremacy and patriarchy, I could just as easily find a jury of people who would convict their own people if they were made to believe that Indigenous people are criminals and drunks and thieves.
Erica, good points, and now I feel bad going to Doug about this because, Doug, there's this story out from one person who was apparently involved or there when jury selection was happening, saying that Indigenous people in the room didn't want to take part or had a bias from the beginning. Were you somebody who was around while they were going through selection process? And what do you make of this story of one unnamed person saying this?
I wasn't around during the jury selection.
Well, that story's not correct. I was there.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, Doug, go ahead. Sorry, Erica.
I was there for the jury. I was there for the jury selection, and I sat in on it. And they had brought in about, I would say, about 300 people, and there was, I think the news story said it's 50-50. Well, it wasn't. I would say about 10 to 15% of the jury pool were Aboriginal. I'm just guessing here because, you really can't tell. But anyway, there was no, it was very difficult. These guys were, they'd come up and they'd make their selection and they'd just be challenged left and right. So of the people that recused themselves, there were a number of students who were there. There were some single mothers. There was a guy who said he was a bus driver. But these guys all had reasons to be recused. And there was a whole pile of white people who recused themselves too. So it wasn't, I think that the problem with the jury selection there was the defense lawyer.
I'd like to take another caller now. We're going to go to Martha, who's calling into the show from Swift Current. Martha, go ahead.
Hi. I thank you for your show and what the people are saying. And I'd like to say that I married a Norwegian Air Force pilot, and I went to Norway for 5 years. And when I was in Norway as a young wife, I had a lot of Norwegians come up to me and say, thank you, as a Canadian, for what your soldiers did for us. They kept us alive. They gave us medicine. They gave us their food. They helped us. And we want to thank you for that. And when I think that they did that for all of Europe, and that my uncles were there, and then later on, as my brothers got older, they became soldiers, and that the Indian people have played a role in helping Canada all over the world. And it saddens me so much to know that coming from a background like that a man can hold a gun to a sleeping man's head and blow it away. I am just appalled. I cannot believe it. Not only that, as I said, I come from Red Pheasant. I lived in Red Pheasant when I was a child and then moved away. Go back into history. It was in Red Pheasant that 8 of my relatives were hung for nothing more than wanting to feed their family. They were the last people hung in Canada. Also, Poundmaker was hung because of starvation throughout Indian lands, and he also was hung. So the history is there. The precedents have been set. They're there. this is a new precedent that says any Indian that is doing wrong can be shot in the head, and that would be the new law of Canada. And I'm very, very disturbed about it. Thank you so much for having me speak. Bye-bye now.
Bye, Martha. Thanks so much for calling in. Maybe, Ryan, I just do want to ask one thing. Do you feel that the majority of people or many people that are a part of your group feel that it is legal to shoot somebody if they're stealing your property or about to look as though they're taking your property?
I want to say no, but I mean, obviously you can't speak for everybody that's on there. There's going to be both people that are going to make different decisions, but there's a lot of people out there that I think maybe don't understand or have followed the actual facts of that case. And like I said, this website was put up, or this page was put up before this, and that isn't what we were, this isn't our main focus. And, obviously we're following it, and it's a big heated issue across the province, but that's not what we're about. And I can speak on behalf of farmers. That's not what it is at all. It's very terrible circumstance that did happen there. But it's to my understanding, the jury did find it an accidental thing. This wasn't about a self-defense thing. Like I'm sure, like we all know, they didn't go about that case saying that it was a self-defense issue or he was protecting his property. That isn't the way they went. He could have lied and said that he's seen the gun in the vehicle, and he didn't. They went about it as an accidental thing, is what I understand about the case. That being said, it's a lot of your other people on the line here, and I've tried to familiarize myself with our system here in Saskatchewan, and I believe there was around 700 and some people that were selected out of the Battleford area to be, for jury duty. It seems to me only 200 to 300 did show up. So, if anything, that could be made better, and this is kind of what I've been hearing over the last couple of days, is maybe there should be a better way to get more Indigenous people that can't have the way to arrive to courts and stuff like that, but whether it be transportation or whatever it may be. But as far as, and I know this maybe isn't what they're going after, I don't really know what they're trying to change in our system. It has to be decided on both sides, both the defense and the prosecution, to accept the 12 people. That to me is a fair system. Granted, yes, I guess there could have been more Aboriginal people that could have showed up. Even one of the Crown's witnesses, I believe, didn't even show up too. So, and also a little bit on the other thing is I will definitely side with a lot of people on this. It seems the Crown didn't do as good a job. I definitely looked into that. And, even our RCMP, I think, did a pretty terrible job in Saskatchewan of that case, and, taking care of it over the day or two that all this happened. So that's my opinion on that one.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. We're going to have to step aside for another quick break here. We'll be back to continue the conversation here on In Focus. Welcome back to In Focus. Before we continue the conversation here with our guests, let's hear from Colton Bushy's cousin. Here's a bit of what Jade Tatusis had to say this morning in Ottawa.
That this is just the beginning. Us coming here and meeting with this leadership, it does not end here. This is an ongoing process and has been. And we continue. We will be back. We will be speaking out. This does not end here. We will continue the dialogue, and we will press for concrete changes within the system so that no other families, no other Indigenous lives are taken before changes are made.
A real whirlwind for the family this week, 3 days of meetings in Ottawa. And Doug, I'd like to go to you and something that you've touched on, and that was that you feel this might be a watershed moment here, and maybe if you could elaborate on why you feel that's the case.
I think it's a watershed moment for the country, but it's something that it's not just going to be solved in Ottawa by changing a few laws. What we have to do is work in our own communities and get the proper level of education up with our people, and educate the local settlers around us and tell us so we know what's going on. We've got to have communication, and I think what we've done now is we've really set these wheels in motion. Like, we can't be ignored anymore, and I think that's very important. So I do see that this is going to go. It's going to be there'll be the legal process, there'll be social processes, and then there'll be the political process, and it's all going to come together.
Jacqueline, you also mentioned a watershed moment here. Why do you feel that's going to be the case?
Well, I think one thing that this case does do is expose racism. It's not new. For some people, it's surprising. In the cities, at the level of government, we've been talking reconciliation. At the universities, we've been talking reconciliation. But I think that discussion has gone on way before we've had truth. And for Canada to really reconcile with its past, with the way it's treated Indigenous people, we have to be able to know what the truth is and to speak honestly about it, and have all Canadians, whether they live in cities or in rural areas, understand the injustices that have been done, the things that have been done to Indigenous people that are not legal, that are not moral, that are not appropriate, and face reconciliation with everyone sitting at the table as equal people, feeling equally confident in their place as Canadians, and equally welcome.
Erica is somebody, part of the grassroots and organizer on the ground with people. Does something feel different to you this time around?
I hope it is, and I think we always hope it is, and we hope that we'll be moving forward in a better way. But I also know that Saskatchewan has to grapple with its own history, and so does the rest of Canada. I think of the comment that our caller made earlier about the 1885 hangings. And these are the sort of things that we learn when we grow up Indigenous in the Battlefords in Saskatchewan, and things that settlers aren't told. They aren't told that the only reason that our people are hanged or executed by the government of Canada, by the government of Saskatchewan, and by the RCMP is because we're trying to feed our family and protect our families. And I think, Ryan, your aim was the same. It's to protect your family, right? But the thing is that we probably Doug and I and Jacqueline, we probably got like 3 or 4 death threats on our way in today, on our way into work, on our way into school, and we don't feel the need to hide our names. So I want you to move beyond that fear and learn the real history about Saskatchewan and this place, to stand with us.
Ryan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I guess I do understand exactly what she's meaning there, and I hope that maybe you guys could kind of understand our side of it as well, because I know for probably every one of you right there, if you ever had some issue happen, the first thing you do is you phone the police, and they'll probably be there right away. But what I think a lot of people across the country don't realize is where I live right now, I am at the very least, I bet you, an hour. Even if you gave really good directions, make somebody show up, it would for sure take that long for me to have assistance or help. And when it comes down to a lot of these things, which are happening across the province, I think there was one even about 3-4 weeks ago. A guy his family were held at gunpoint, tied up in the bathtub. Masked robbers came in, the whole deal. And it's nobody knows when it's going to happen, if it'll ever happen. But the reason, like I say, we started this thing is what do we have as Canadians that don't have the option to get help and get the law enforcement help that you need? We're not obviously about vigilante justice. That isn't it at all. But if anything, like if we could fix something in this country, I would really like to see something done on the legal side of it, where somebody can go into a yard, do a crime, get caught, and they're out again 6 months later. And that is what I would say a lot, and maybe the majority of us are getting fed up with. I think if you start fixing that, we're going to see a lot better things happen in the country. So for now, and I do apologize if it is that big a deal to people, I don't really want to baste my name. Like I said, I live in the middle of nowhere, and all I have to protect myself is my skills and what I have in my house to protect myself with. So also, I should mention here, my phone is going to die, and I'm going to have to run here if that's all right.
That's all right, yeah. And Ryan, I think a lot of people I know wouldn't even feel comfortable calling the police in the first place. Doug, we've got very little time here. What would you like to see happen next?
Well, I think next we have to deal with the jury system right away. That's a quick fix as far as I can see. Mr. Stanley's going to be going back to court on gun charges. We'll see how that turns out. There's also the appeal. We don't know if they're going to go ahead on that or not. So there's a number of short-term things that can be done here. On the longer term, we got to look at the justice system and what can be done to improve it. Our people are way overrepresented on the bad side of the justice system in jails and courts and so on. So that's going to have to change.
Erica, if you could, in 15, 20 seconds, what would you like to see happen?
I'd like to be able to walk to school. I want to walk down 20th Street in Saskatoon and not be afraid of going missing. I want us to have a grocery store in our community. I want us to have a farmer's place in our community. I want us to be out of jail, and I want us to be able to not worry about getting shot in the head going for a drive through our lands.
Wow. Yeah, thanks, Erica. Unfortunately, we do have to leave the show there. We're out of time. I want to thank our guests here in Winnipeg studio, Jacqueline Romano; in Toronto, Erica Violet Lee; in Saskatoon, Doug Cuthand; and on the line, Ryan with Farmers with Firearms. I'd also like to thank Tamara and Steve for helping us out, and a huge thanks to Charmaine. We will be back next week for more In Focus.